Good morning, we're live. It's Thursday, and today I got two things to cover for you that I think every dog owner should be aware of, okay? Here's the two subjects. We'll get back into them in a second. Accidental reinforcement and self-rewarding behaviors. We need to talk about it, especially if you're new to this whole living with dogs thing. This is a big one. It doesn't sound like a big one, but it is. You can actually really create a mess if you're not aware of what you're doing. So today is all about creating some awareness, all right? We're talking about accidental reinforcement or unintentional reinforcement and self-rewarding behaviors, okay? I know those sound like big fancy words, but they're not. Let me break it down to you, what I'm talking about, what's happening, and how it's creating dogs to misbehave and be unbalanced and even kooky upstairs, right? Especially if you do this while you're raising the dog, okay? So, are you unknowingly saying yes to your dog when you should be saying no, right? Can you imagine that? Could you imagine accidentally or saying yes to your dog when you actually mean to say no? What that would create if you put that on repeat, which people do. It's going to create, like if yes is the opposite of no, then I imagine that the behavior of your dog is going to be the opposite of what you want. Okay? All right, let's get into it. Have you ever heard the old term, you get what you pet? You get what you pet, meaning like if your dog's doing a certain behavior, behaving a certain way, if you pet the dog or any version of that, praise the dog, reward the dog, then you get more of that behavior. That's why I love that old saying, you get what you pet. It rhymes, it's easy to remember. It pretty much is saying, if you reward while your dog is doing X, Y, or Z, they will continue to do more of X, Y, and Z, whether that be barking, whining, pulling, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we got this conversation we're going to go into, but then the other side of it is self-rewarding behaviors. You need to be aware of these too, especially if you're a new dog owner. Self-rewarding behaviors, this means that they're already rewarding whether or not you're rewarding it. If you're ignoring it, it's going to be rewarded because it's self-rewarding, such as jumping, chewing on a shoe, chewing on anything. What else I got? Rough play, humping, pulling on the leash, barking, counter surfing. These things are self-rewarding. So therefore, even if we do nothing, they're going to continue to happen more. So if we ignore them, they're going to continue to happen more because they're getting reinforced every time the dog does it because it's either self-soothing, energy releasing, or fun, So jumping when guests come over. It's fun, and it's a release of energy, and it's our little ritual. So if we ignore it, it happens more. Mouthing, rough play, and humping. Self-rewarding. So if we ignore it, it happens more, especially if it doesn't get corrected by another dog. Pulling on the leash, self-rewarding. Wait, why? Because when I pull and I feel this thing tight, I get to go where I want to go. This sensation of this tight leash gets me to the tree, gets me to the dog, right? Self-rewarding, self-rewarding, self-rewarding. So you need to be aware of this stuff if you're a new dog owner. Are you saying yes when you mean to say no? And are you ignoring things that you need to go and interrupt, indirect, and correct? Okay? So this is a big one, and I'm going to give you some examples. If you're guilty of these things, don't worry. Everybody chokes up sometimes with this stuff if they've had dogs all their life, all right? But you need to be aware of it. So let me break down the whole accidental or unintentional reinforcement thing. What that means, there's two ways to motivate, or let's say there's two ways to influence a behavior choice from your dog, right? You either reinforce or reward, meaning you want more of that behavior, or you punish, discouraging that behavior to happen. So if you punish or tie an aversive to the behavior, then you see the behavior less or not at all. And that's it. So that's it. It doesn't get any more complicated than that. You're either rewarding, ignoring, or punishing. So you're either agreeing with your dog on what they're doing, or you're being neutral, or you're disagreeing. That's it. That's all there is. So it's not super confusing. But just wait till we see what happens. How many dogs do you know like to be baby talked? Raise your hand, right? So that would land on the reinforcing side. When you're using baby talk, you're reinforcing whatever's happening in that moment. How many dogs like to be pet? That you know. Just about all of them, right? That will go in the reinforcement category. That is, if you pet, you're reinforcing whatever you're petting. How many dogs like food? You see what I mean? Toys, all this stuff. So if petting and baby talking, because these are the big ones that we use when we accidentally reinforce, they are reinforcers because they equal good stuff to the dog. You know, you can get a tail wag when you say good boy. That's a reinforcer. You pet a dog on the head, they like that. That feels good. That they associate that with good stuff. They associate that with you being happy with them. That goes in the reinforcement category. That means when you're using this language with your dog, you're telling your dog to do more. Okay? Now, I just seen a scenario yesterday that this is just one of probably a million that you can see, but we were driving by downtown Frederick, and there was a couple sitting at a restaurant outside with their dog. It was a big dog. I'm not good with breeds, but it was a big dog. And it starts barking. It's laying down, but then it gets up and it starts barking, and she's got it on the leash, and they're sitting down enjoying the lunch, but it's barking at another dog walking by, and the dog's walking by, and it's going woof, 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 causing a little bit of a scene. Big, deep barks. And so she pulls the dog in with the leash, and she starts petting it, saying it's okay. And as the owner of the other dog's walking by, they're saying sorry to that person, sorry about that, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, their hand's doing this to the dog. Pet, pet, pet. And the dog's still barking, by the way. Woof, pet, 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 woof. And even though she might have said something like, knock it off or something, the tone of voice she used, like the words don't matter, the tone of your voice. So she was very soft. Hey, it's okay. Hey, hey, hey. Using this kind of pitch is where you say, good boy, good girl, good, nice work, yeah, good job. Not, hey, no, right? The tone, so this tone, hi, go ahead to your dog and just start going, blah, 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 blah. Just use that tone. You can say any word you want. That tone is usually associated with a reinforcer. It usually has positive associations. Good boy, good girl. So you're reinforcing the behavior. That, on top of that, you're petting the dog. So this dog is getting the message of it's going to do this more. Plus it's self-rewarding. So if we did nothing at all, it would do it more. So what can you do? You know what I'm going to say. Punish. So could you imagine, this is just a made up scenario, but could you imagine, and this will never happen, that dog started barking, and instead of getting pet and using a high tone, a really soft tone with the dog, could you imagine if somebody just said no and then bonked it in the head with a rolled up towel? If you don't know what a bonker is, go check it out. That would go a long ways to stopping that behavior. Do that a couple times, because that's punishing. And the punishing adds an aversive to a behavioral choice, which makes the behavioral choice less likely to be chosen the next time that the situation comes up, and to the point where the dog finds a different behavior. Okay, I'm not going to do that. What happens if I just sit here and let the thing pass? Oh, that seems to be much better. I even got a French fry off from my mom's meal because I was quiet. You know what I mean? And you can reinforce quiet. And you can pet him afterwards if he was quiet. So people accidentally reinforce all the time, right? Like a scared dog, a dog who is insecure, so he's reacting with bad choices, behavioral choices we don't like, but we're agreeing with because we're hanging on to it, we're petting it, and we're using soft tones with it. It's okay, it's okay, it's okay, right? So even a nervous dog who's making some bad choices, we know it's nervous, so therefore we want to nurture. But what we got to do is we actually got to punish the choices, the behavioral choices. I'm not punishing you for being nervous. I'm punishing you for barking and trying to make a scene, right? So that's all. There's only two ways to motivate your dog's behavior. Like I told you guys that. You're either reinforcing it or you're punishing it. Or you're neutral. You're just ignoring it and letting whatever happens. And that's it. There is no other thing. You're either rewarding it, ignoring it, or punishing it and disagreeing with it. That's it. So you can start to see, if you open up your eyes and watch people with their dogs out in the world, you're going to see why their dogs are out of control and why they just don't understand why these dogs don't listen. It's because you're always saying yes when you mean to say no. When you need to be saying no. And you probably even are saying no. I literally see people saying no to their dog and the dog's still seeing it as a reinforcer because the tone's so high, they don't add any aversive to it. There's no aversive to that sound coming out of your mouth. Now, every time you say no in a certain tone, no, a little deeper. If you add a physical correction to that, then that sound takes on some of the qualities of the physical correction. So you don't need a physical correction every time. Yeah, that's true. That's called gaining enough respect. So you don't have to do that. You can say no and the dog listens. This is where we want to get. But people aren't doing that. They're going, no, honey, no, honey. Or they're getting frustrated. I do see people get frustrated and like knock it off. But the dog's not even paying attention to them because it's just hot air. It's just words coming out of their mouth. They're not actually correcting the dog physically, So 2 things to be aware of. The accidental reinforcement thing is so big. And I honestly believe that paired with self-rewarding behaviors going unchecked, aside from not training the dog and doing all that is going, it is causing so much trouble. It's causing so many problems with so many dogs. And it's confusing a lot of dogs too. A lot of dogs don't understand the world, and they're getting nurtured when they don't need to be, and we're reinforcing certain states of mind and certain associations of certain bad behavioral choices by trying to nurture the dog, but we're really just reinforcing and patterning those behaviors. And a year or 2 in, the dog's a mess. So that's the little topic for today. I thought I would do this as a subject, even though I knew it wasn't going to take forever to talk about. But I figured if you're new to dogs, this is something that you're going to need to be aware of. Okay? I'm going to go to some comments and then I'll go back to this. Thank you for joining, everybody. If you're new here, my name is Josh. I work at Julie's Canine Academy, and I do this live show at 8 a.m. Monday through Friday. Thank you for joining. Bart says, if a human has a panic attack and is freaking out, yelling no at them or hitting them will increase the panic behavior. Seems the same with dogs sometimes. I have to agree with that. A calm, warm word and nice touch helps. Now, that's another thing to remember. And Bart, I'm glad you brought this up. If people are going the opposite end, so if they're going towards trying to stop this, like say they're going to go deal with it, but they're getting really, you see it, frustrated, worked up. Hey, knock it off. Hey, you little son of a bitch. Like, that's no good. That's what's going on there. Yeah, you're just adding. So if this is a chaotic situation, there's somebody at the door, right? Knock, 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 causes chaos already. You being just as chaotic in the mind, you're practically a barking dog at that point. You're practically just right there with them. There's nobody stable to bring them back to where you need them to be. So when you go to correct a dog, there is a way to do it. And that's why you hear people say, be calm and be confident and try to be clear to the dog. If you can do those 3 C's, if that's how you want to remember it, calm, confident, and clear, because clear communication is a big part of it. And if you're panicky, like Bart said, and you're yelling and you're not clear. Like, it might be obvious that you don't like what they're doing, but most of the time I see dogs ignore their owners when they're yelling at them like that anyway. They're not even listening. They're so used to it. But that stuff doesn't help because you're not thinking. All right? What helps is to just understand the dog just chose a behavioral choice that it doesn't like. This is why we do setups. This is why if the dog barks at the door, let's just set it up so that we can deal with it 10 times in a row for the next few days. And every time the dog barks, we can mark it with a no, give a correction, and then direction, set it up again. What happens is eventually the dog's not going to need a correction. It's just going to sit there. It's not going to bark. It's going to look at you and you're going to say good. And it's going to say, oh, that's how I get through this. And you can get through barking at the door, just like you can get over pulling on the leash and barking at other dogs and leash reactivity and all the shit that everyone struggles with. But you need to put the dog in the situation and have a clear game plan of how you're going to correct and direct. And then also reward for the right choices and be clear to the dog and teach, But what we see most of the time is people rewarding it by saying, if the dog's barking and running up, they're saying, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. They're not even usually saying no, to be honest with you, Bart, the people I see. I do see people say no, they're a little rarer, but usually even then, it's either too soft and non-committed, they don't mean it, or they're doing what you said. They're going crazy and they're getting frustrated and all that stuff. So that doesn't work very well because the dogs are already in that space. You need to show them where they need to be, calm. So, it's a great topic. It's a short one, but it's very important. Remember, there's only 2 ways to influence your dog's behavior, and that's if you want to influence yourself. And that's to either reward and to agree and to reinforce the behavior, or to punish, add an aversive, and discourage the behavior. That's it. Or ignore it. That's the third one. Just ignore it. And let's talk about the self-rewarding behaviors. This is crazy because this is where, like, okay, jumping is self-rewarding. So if it's already self-rewarding, you have to add an aversive to stop it. That's nature. That's just the laws of how this shit works. If the dog enjoys doing it, then it will do it unless it no longer enjoys doing it. That's it. So if you add an aversive, the dog comes to their own conclusion, especially if you're doing training with an e-collar and stuff, where the dog understands its behavior is why it's being corrected, but you don't have to be right there up on the dog with a leash to correct it. You don't necessarily have to be touching it. The dog has its own experience. It realizes that jumping is no longer fun, so it's no longer a behavior choice that it chooses anymore. You know, that's science, baby. That's science. Same with mouthing, chewing, rough play, pulling on the leash. I already named all these off. It's everything. So many things, because what dogs do, they just do what's fun. They want to be comfortable and having fun, like at all times. So most of their choices are for fun, you know. And if they're having fun on their own and you ignore it, it continues. You have to add an aversive. So that's how it goes. That's the name of the game. Now, figuring out how to do that is your responsibility. You need, like Bart brought up, people yelling at their dogs and stuff. It's a good point to know that you should take time. What you should be studying is how to properly correct and punish a dog physically. You need to know how to do it. You cannot live with a dog and have it listen to you without physically punishing it from time to time when it needs to be done. Especially if it's a puppy, there's going to be times that you need to teach it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And you got to do it physical a couple times so at least the dog knows you will, and then you're probably good. Like, how often do I have to get physical with my dogs? Is not often, but I had to in the past. During certain conversations where I had to set the tone, I had to let them know that I can set rules. This is how it works. It's like, hey, I can set rules. Let me prove it to you. Here's a rule. When they break it, here's what happens. Oh. When you don't break it, here's what happens. Good boy. Oh. A couple of those types of rules set and the dog breaks it, like, hey, don't pull on the leash. Okay, there's one. Don't run around the house or like go up on the counters or something. Okay, there's one. A couple of these, the dog starts to learn this particular person can set rules, and if he tells me not to do it, I'm going to listen because I already know, because in the past he's proven to me when he set rules, he follows through. So now all of a sudden I can set rules and the dog listens even in new environments because now the dog sees me as the leader, as somebody who can come into the room, make rules and follow through. So it doesn't matter if it's the first time me saying no to this thing because they already know that me saying no to stuff in general equals this. That's the underlying conversation. That's the rule between me and my dog. There's only two things I'm asking of my dog. It's stop doing what you're doing if I ask, and do what I ask. So it's like, if I ask you to do something, do it, and if I ask you to stop, stop. That is how I live with my dog, and that is the rules between me and my dog. All right? That's the bare minimum. So once your dog understands that you prove to your dog that you can set rules and that you will follow through with these rules, even if it's a small one. That's why trainers love using structure, because it pretty much implements that. It tells, hey, have your dog sit at the door. And it's like, well, why? And it's like, well, here's a reason. Because if he doesn't, you can correct him. And it's like, well, I don't need him to sit. I don't want to correct him. It's like, you're missing the point. The point is you're saying, if I say to do something and you don't, I will follow through. It's not about the sit. It's about me talking to you. You understand? And that is how it works. That is relationship. That is your relationship to the dog. It's like, if I say no, you already know I'll follow through because I've done it through a few situations in the past. Okay? And here's another one. For maintenance for that relationship, that nice, healthy relationship where your dog's listening to you based off from past experiences, how you keep that, because it will go away. If your dog starts slipping and you don't do something, your dog will eventually slip and not be as well behaved because you weren't on the wagon. This is what happens. This is the rule of thumb. Within those two rules that I said, if I have to ask twice, there's a correction. Right? So it's like, and I don't necessarily mean that literally, but if the dog's giving me a hard time, there has to be a correction to keep the dog in line. So what's rule number one? If I ask you to do something, do it, right? So if I go to place, okay, and the dog starts to go to place but then stops, and I say, no, go to place, and then they get on place, I'm not going to correct them physically, right? So there's a little idea of how I'm using it. But if I tell the dog to place and they completely ignore me or give me any type of attitude and I have to ask twice, I'm going to give a physical. So it's a 1-to-1 ratio, right? I'm going to ask once and I'm going to correct once. And then I'm going to ask again and correct again if I don't get it. And that's when I decide to enter that conversation of, really, you're not listening right now. Okay, I'm going to drop what I'm doing and enter this conversation with you where I'm going to ask, and if you don't do it, I'm going to correct. And then I'm going to ask again. And if you don't do it, which they don't make you. See, this is the thing. Like, if you get a sloppy moment where the dog's not able to figure it out, and you're having this moment where they don't know how to take your direction yet, they don't know how far you'll bring it. That happens once, maybe twice. They just need to know that you'll go where you need to go. And then they believe you. And that's just how relationships work. So that's why they're important. That's why when you decide to say, I'm going to take care of this, you can't go half-hearted and go give up when your dog. You see that too. A lot of dogs that come in here, they've had owners that tried, but failed in the sense where the dog will, here's an example. The dog whining for food at the table. This one blows my mind, okay? I used to have my grandma's dog's a little hot dog, a little dachshund, and she would whine at the table for food, and she would get fed, But then my grandma was like, we are going to put an end to this. No more food off the table for Moki, starting right now. So we're eating dinner, and Moki, and I don't know anything about dog training. This was years before I got into dog training. So she is whining at the table, just sitting there whining, and Nanny's ignoring it. It's still going. I'm like, Jesus, this dog's gonna keep whining. Finally, my grandma she's like, fine, and she gives the dog a piece of fucking food. That's not good. Because what she did is she tried, but then the dog continued to do the behavior longer and more intense than it ever has. And in that moment, it got rewarded just to shut it up. And what happened is it taught the dog to do it longer and more intense. So then later on, she tried to do it again. I swear to you, this is amazing stuff. Again, like a month later, we're not feeding Moki. She's getting fat or whatever. The dog's right there at the table. Again, it's right there, sitting there while we're eating dinner. And not only is it whining this time more intense early, it now starts to jump up. And so you just see this little head come up to the table whining, and my grandma's ignoring it. No, Moki. She's talking to the dog. My grandma wouldn't mind if I tell this story because it helps people. She's talking to the dog. No, Moki, no. And she's eating her food. No, Moki, no. Dog's jumping and whining now. New behavior and everything. It's getting crazy. You can't enjoy your meal. God, fine. What do? You reward it. Give her some food. Just one. Now go. Now we just reinforced jumping and whining and taught the dog duration, bad behavior. If you continue to elevate, then I will eventually give in. So just keep going. And this happens a lot. And I don't mean I'm not picking on my grandma, right? That was just one example. This happens a lot where people try, but then they're like, fine, get on the couch or get off the couch. And it's like the dog doesn't want to get off the couch and it's giving you a fit. And you're like, fine, stay on the couch. These are bad moments. These are moments that are adding up. These compound together to end up being some bad moments. Eventually, years later, I got into dog training. And you know what we did? We got Moki to stop this bullshit in a session. Can you guess what we did? She did this for years, guys. Years. You can't. And not only did she do this, she barked at the fucking door like crazy. Anybody coming in, she could hear a car coming up the driveway. It doesn't matter who it is. It's just terrible. I added a punishment to the behavior. And then I directed the dog. So we started eating. She started whining. I marked it with a no. I corrected her with my hand, a dog whispering, little poke to the side. And then I said, go. And I directed her, and I pushed her into the living room, which she could still see us, but she was pushed back. And then I walked away, and I sat down to eat, and she came strolling back over to the table, and now I said, no, because I don't want you to this. I got my grandma's permission to do all this first, by the way. I was like, you sure? Because I'm going to be correcting her, and she's your baby, and blah, blah, blah. She was like, just yes, we need some peace. I correct her again, touch, put her back, use some social pressure. I know this dog. I live with this dog, right? I go down to eat. It's a fucking miracle. It's a miracle. My grandma was a believer in me that day because she seen that dog was just sitting there and she wasn't stressed because the option was taken away. She's like, okay, this isn't going to happen. She's just laying in the living room watching us. And that's how it can happen. That's how quick it can happen. But of course you need to stay on top of that. If I just didn't do that tomorrow, then the dog goes right back to whining at the table. Of course. But if you say this is a new rule, and then you reinforce that, you reinforce being in the living room, calming down, even if you want to use food, you could. You're just reinforcing that because what do you really care about is the whining and the jumping and all the nonsense, the barking and all this. It drives people nuts. They learn to live with it, but then eventually it's like, yeah! As soon as there's any other stress in life, it's like now that dog whining and barking is just too much. So I applied a punisher, meaning I disagreed with it, which means it's less likely to happen again. So whine equaled an aversity. So an aversive. So the dog goes, oh, that whine equaled not such a good response from the environment or from my human here. It remembers that. So the next time we eat, I don't have to do that. I get to the point where I look at Moki and I say, shh, and she'll go and lay down. She'll just go relax away from the table. I don't have to go through the whole ritual. But the first couple of times you do. But after you get the relationship, the dog learns, oh, if I just leave the situation and go relax. And then what happens is the dog realizes that's the case with everything. With even, if you're barking at the people coming up the driveway, if I shh and look at you, if you go lay down and relax, that's the answer. Right? If I say no to chewing on something and you go over across the room, you leave it alone, you relax, that's the answer. They start to realize that's the answer to 99% of what you're saying no to. If you say no, just disengage and relax, that's the answer. So they learn with you, if you're disagreeing with something, if they just let it go, that's the answer. That's how they get out of it. And so therefore you can go into new environments and start disagreeing with things and setting rules, and the dog listens. It's not like because of the new environment, it's because they know you will fall through. That you'll follow through. That's why. If he says no, then it's no. Right? Okay. Are you saying yes when you mean to say no? How about that couple that I was telling you about? Remember, bark, 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 and she's petting it and saying sorry to the guy? What if she didn't pet it, but instead she gave it a physical aversive, like a bonker? No, she just stood up. Everybody would stop and stare and take their phones out and be like, oh my God, look at this lady. But she would just say, no, take that rolled up towel, boom, on the snout. Don't bark at strangers because that's not polite community behavior. And then just sit there and wait for the dog to try to bark again. You can't do that because people will pull out their phones on you and call you a dog abuser. But what you're doing is you're going to get your dog actually being able to be out in the community more, because that dog's eventually not going to be out in the community. I hate to say it, but I see it all the time. That's not going to get better. So that dog's going to go out less. That's what's going to happen. It's going to go out less. But if you punish it, you have a couple rough sessions, let's say, the dog had to get corrected, then it's over. And we can still go out to eat, except now the dog's not barking. We can hold it accountable because they believe us. When we say no, they say, okay. Because now I know what happens when you say no. And it's real. It's a real consequence. And it's something I actually don't like. So I'll avoid that by not barking. And that's how it works, okay, guys? Don't say yes when you mean to say no. And you got to stop. And listen, all this self-rewarding behaviors like jumping, mouthing, and all this shit, and chewing on the furniture, and chasing the cat, and all this shit, it can all be avoided if we just train our dogs up and use structure. So if we're hey, if the dog knows place, if you don't know what place is, you send the dog to a dog bed, and the rules are it can't get off until you say, then it can't do any of those other things. So that's the beauty of training the dog up young and using structure, is you can avoid these bad habits becoming practice, because if they're practiced, then they're patterned. And if they're patterned, they're a pain. Okay? Just remember that. The more they do it, the worse it gets. So, the first thing people, when they call us to say, is there anything I can do before I get to you? Because there's 6-month wait to the program. Is there anything I can do? And the thing is, we're you can start kenneling it, because that's going to help. And you can also start not putting it in the situations where it practices these behaviors that you're complaining about. We don't want any more reps. We don't want any more deepening of the pattern in the brain where the dog's just ingrained. And this is what I do when I hear a knock on the door. This is what I do when I see a dog on the walk. Try to get them out of those situations as much as possible. And then when they come here, we start the training that will change the way they associate these certain situations. Okay? And then we train our owners not to pet your dog while it's barking. Correct it. Unless you want it to bark more, then of course pet it. Because that's what we do to like guard dogs, right? My guard dog, when I was teaching my dog to growl and do its thing around the dog, or anybody who's teaching the dog to be a guard dog, you're going to reward, hopefully, and let the dog know how awesome of a job it did when it barked. That's what you're going to do. You're going to, I'm over there patting Riggins. Nice work, buddy. Good job. The same way as they're doing it, except I want Riggins to be growling when I see somebody come to the door. So I was training him to do that. And somebody who's training a guard dog or a protection dog is going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be praising the hell out of that dog when it starts to bark. You know what I mean? So you can't do that unless you want your dog to bark. All right, I'm going to take questions. Hey, guys, tomorrow's Friday. If you got any idea for content for tomorrow or for the next week, as far as ideas for topics, shoot them in the comments, okay? I'll take a look. Appreciate everybody coming on today. It's Thursday. It's a beautiful day out today, I think. It's going to be a nice one. And we got a new dog coming in today. I always love it when we get a new dog because it's a fresh start to start the beginning of the process. There is no relationship with me and this dog. This dog does have a history of being nippy. It is an Australian Shepherd. I think it's like 3. I don't know how old it is, but I think it's like 3, which means it's set in its ways. Whatever it believes, it already believes. And so, it's already an adult. So it's a little bit, they're set in their ways a bit. They've already got patterns. And I'm going to find them out when I get to see this dog today. And that's the fun part, is to figuring out the personality, the temperament, and then to see how I can bypass all the bullshit. 3, Julie says the dog is 3. If I can bypass mostly all the bullshit through becoming the dog's leader, like the relationship being what it needs to be so that I have enough respect and trust from the dog, how will that change the dog's response to me, and how will that change the dog's response to the world without me even addressing those particular responses? That's always fascinating. And then also addressing particular things, and how bad is the kickback, how much of an attitude does this dog have, is this a biting dog? All this stuff is fun to figure out, and I get to figure it out within the first few days. So appreciate you guys coming in. Hey, don't reinforce things you mean to punish, okay? Don't say yes when you mean to say no. Be careful of accidental reinforcement, and self-rewarding behaviors will continue to happen and worsen if we don't add an aversive to them, okay? We got another question here. How would you correct whining/warning soft barking when on place when someone is at the door? So I actually like that. Is that my friend Mike? I think it might be. I like a little, like, the rule of thumb is when you say enough, that means stop, okay? Enough doesn't mean never bark again. It means right now, stop. No would mean, like, don't do that again, right? So enough, you can think of it that way. After you say enough, if the dog makes another sound out of its mouth, you can correct. And then what I would do is I would do setups with this, though. So I would like, you would pretend somebody was at the door just to get it going. The dog would growl. It's like, okay, good. If you want that one growl. If you don't, you're just going to say no and correct. All right? If you don't want that first growl, you're just going to say no and correct from there, and just keep correcting the whining. And knock, whine, no, or is it just whining? A soft barking? No, correct. If you want to, I would just say enough. And then, like, the dog does a little soft bark, you can even say no, but no physical correction. And then go back for the knock on the door. If they do it again, physical correction. And then knock on the door, they're quiet, good. Knock on the door, quiet, good. All right? And then repeat again in a few hours or tomorrow. So we got to teach the dog. If you do slip up and you make a little noise, if I say no, just stop. Just stop. Because that's the rule. Remember I was saying the rule that I have with my dog, the 2 rules I have with my dogs, is like if I say stop, stop. And if I say do. That's it. So if the dog's doing something and I say, hey, stop doing that thing that you're doing right now by saying no to it while the dog's doing it, that's what you're saying. Then if the dog does it again, then I'll correct. And then we'll have that conversation. It's an important one to have with the dog. Laura says, we live in a townhome with our main level up on flights of stairs. We can't see when someone arrives. Penny will give a bark and jump up when she's startled. How or do we correct? Now, if she's startled, like startles into it, maybe she's like taking a nap and then it's like whatever, and then she startles and barks. Now, you can see some dogs get really bad with this. Like, they'll startle and go into a complete shit show. And run towards the door blindly, like half asleep. That, you're going to have to shut down, right? That's going to no, and then I would use a bonker. Look into a bonker because it's, you could do e-collar and all this stuff, but that's invested. You got to get invested for that. To just stop an unwanted behavior, you simply just need an add and aversive that works. And if you look up bonker, B-O-N-K-E-R, the trainer Gary Wilkes is really well known for coming up with this idea. It's pretty much a rolled up bath towel with a couple rubber bands on it, so it looks like a big burrito, and it replicates the old newspaper where people would say no to the dog and go swat it on the nose. That's pretty much what you use it like, but you could just say no, and if the dog's already at the door, you can literally throw it at the dog. But go watch YouTube videos to see how to do it, okay? Seriously, I know it sounds self-explanatory, but there are YouTube videos out there. And it just adds an aversive to the dog's behavioral choice, and you say you disagree, and then you send the dog away. Now, let's say it's not that bad. Let's say she just startles and just does like a woo. If you say no, it's the same answer as the last one. If you say no or shh or something like that to disagree, and she stops, I don't know. I guess I don't know if I'd really go after that. But if she continues, then I would correct. So again, the best way to do it is to set it up, Laura. Have somebody at the other side of the door, or even fake a knock. Some dogs you can just kind of hide your hand behind your back and just knock on the door, and they think somebody's here. Bark, no, correct. Obviously she's not barking. Knock again. She doesn't bark. Good. Okay. Knock again. She doesn't bark. Good. So you have to start teaching. The bark is no equals punisher, which, you can use the bonker. You look at that up. But not barking equals good job. And you just repeat that a bit. It's kind of like training, and it's called setups because nobody's actually at the door, but the dog thinks there is. Because you're just working on that sound. It's that sound now that's the trigger. Okay, so Ace Dog Academy says, do you use shh as a pre-punisher / warning system? Is the idea not watered down no, and give the dog guidance and to give him a chance to avoid the punisher? Ace Dog Academy, I gotta tell you, I never really thought of it that way, but I have thought of it that way, but not until recently. And I think that is something that I do. I just wasn't aware of it. And because you can disagree. Shh, hey, you're heading in the wrong direction there, right? And then if they do go all the way in the wrong direction, then you can say no. And the idea that what Ace is saying here is that when you say no, you don't want to water that down. So every time you say no, it equals a physical correction, right? At least until your relationship's right with your dog, because eventually you'll say no, and what you'll see, which some people on here probably know what I'm talking about, is your dog will stop. They won't keep going. So there is no need to physically correct. It's if you say no and the dog needs that physical correction, then you do. So the idea is to not water down no. You can do shh, which is like a disagreeing, right? You're disagreeing, but you're preserving that physical punisher. So if they go again, you can say no and punish. I think that would work phenomenally. I use shush in that way. I also use shush in energy too through training now because I do state of mind training. So shush will also mean to calm down and stuff. But that pre-warning stuff, I really do like it. I really do like it because you can mark it. That's wrong. Give them a chance to do it again. They do the wrong behavior again. No punisher. Works. Laura says it's usually just one bark. That's a good dog. She has an e-collar as well. She sees you in October. Cool. We typically correct and say no, and she'll come back to place. Oh, well, Laura, you got it going on. She's startling into it, and there is things you can do with it. Yeah, you can technically, because we used to have dogs that would startle from sleep, and the only time this dog would be aggressive was if it was sleeping and it was startled awake. Like a door would knock, someone knock on the door, or somebody would walk by or something. This dog would wake up out of a sound sleep and just start going into bite town. It would just go out the door and start using its teeth. That was the only time. It would not do it when you could not trigger this state of mind while the dog was awake. So what we had to do was let the dog sleep, and then we'd have to get really noisy, like bang pots and pans, and have someone come in the door, and the dog would enter this space, and then I would say no, correct, and readjust, and let them relax. But you don't get another rep right away. I mean, you can, but the dogs are, you got to wait for them to sleep again. And this dog would have to stay with me while I was doing painting, and Julie would have to come up and go crazy on the door to try to set it off. Eventually, the dog does self-regulate when it wakes up. You see the dog catch itself, especially if it's on place. So there is work you can do. Do you have to if she's just barking once? You don't really have to. If she's listening to you after you say no and going back to the place bed and relaxing, you're ahead of the game. Ace Dog Training says, got it. I'm thinking more like you said, energy stuff. So like, hey, quiet down. Just like, shh, yes, humans, haha. That is it. That is it. So you can be like, hey, shh, that's not for you. Like, relax. And then if she goes, no, and correct, I love that. And that sounds very typical of what I would be doing. So Laura says, I would say half and half she's sleeping or just hanging out on place. Okay, so it's probably just like really chill, really quiet environment, and then all of a sudden, and she's startling into it. That might settle down after training just naturally. It might. But we can also set it up at training if you would like as well, and we probably will, because it's important to do that kind of stuff where I might have her hang out with me and just have somebody come to the door randomly like a half hour later, and see if I can't trigger it and see, So that's something that we'll proof for sure. Sounds really good. Guys, we did it. We did another good one. And I think it's really valuable, so I hope somebody out there learned something. I know it sounds funny, but it happens all the time. Let me see if I wrote anything else over here. No, I did tell you guys about that scenario, or little barking dogs, and they're going to get picked up and pet. I mean, it's fine. It's just the dog, you are reinforcing barking, so it will happen again tomorrow, okay? So, all right, be aware of that stuff. I appreciate you guys. I will see you tomorrow sometime around 8 a.m. If you have any ideas for topics, leave them in the comments, and I'll see what I can do. I appreciate you guys.